Diabetes Connections is brought to you by inhaled insulin. Fast in, fast out fits your lifestyle. By Omnipod, simplify life with Omnipod 5. By Dexcom G7, the #1 recommended CGM brand. And by EdgePark, trusted for more than 90 years.
This is Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
Welcome to another week of the show. Always so glad to have you here. You know we aim to educate and inspire about diabetes with a focus on people who use insulin. Thank you all for the great feedback on last week's episode with my son, Benny. We dropped him off at college 2 weeks ago now. I came home with a little bit of a cold, so I apologize about my voice. But I got to tell you guys, so far, and fingers crossed, so far so good with Benny at school. My only real complaint is that I'm getting no photos of that kid. He doesn't even post on social media. He never did. So, I can't even stalk him. Before we jump into this week's show, I just want to let you know I'm doing a back-to-school webinar this Thursday. This is not for college. This is an elementary, middle school, high school, back to school. And I'm including the best advice I ever got about sending your kid with diabetes back to school, no matter the age, I promise. And I'm sorry to tease it this way, but this really is the best advice I ever got. And I give it whenever I get the chance. And we're going to be talking about Mom's Night Out as well, a little bit of an info night for that. I'll be going over what I learned. Benny was 2 and now he's in college. So we've done back to school quite a bit. And that is mom level, not doctor level advice this Thursday. You can find all the information in the show notes for this episode or on the Diabetes Connections social media. All right, this week's show is something a little different. When I attended the Friends for Life conference back in July, Tandem Diabetes had a great panel of celebrities living with type 1. I recorded it live, and you're going to hear that today. On the panel are NFL player Chad Muma, actor Mary Mouser, and professional race car driver Ryan Reed. The moderator is CNN correspondent Oren Liebermann, who also lives with type 1. I'm not the moderator. I'm not a part of this panel. I just think you'll really enjoy it, and I wanted to bring it to you. All right, some quick housekeeping, though. There were some audio issues at the beginning. Not Tandem's fault, not my fault. There were just some soundboard issues. My editor, John Buchanan, always does an amazing job with that, but there were some things that he could not fix. So I will set it up in a moment, but we do start a few minutes into the panel, and we end the panel before the audience questions. There's also a short film about Chad Muma that was shown at the event. It's a look at how he kept his dream of playing in the NFL going after his diagnosis. And I will link that up in the show notes so that you can watch it. It's only 4 minutes long. It's really well done. And you should also know that Mary Mouser, Chad Muma, and Ryan Reed have compensation agreements with Tandem Diabetes Care. Because we skipped the introductions that they did live, real quick, Ryan Reed is a NASCAR driver who won the Daytona Xfinity in 2017. Chad Muma plays in the NFL with the Jacksonville Jaguars, and Mary Mouser is an actress who you've seen in Cobra Kai and Scandal and a bunch of other things. We pick it up just after Oren Liebermann, the moderator, has asked Mary to share her diagnosis story.
I was 13. It was a month after my 13th birthday because I vividly remember being like, 13 is such a big, cool number. I really want to remember it. And now I will never forget it. It was like about a month later, I had been sick and in and out of school. And I think I went every week, every Thursday and Friday, I was going to my pediatrician for 6 weeks in a row. And we, went through the whole checklist of everything else it could be, based on the symptoms that we were mentioning. But I forgot to mention that I was up all night having to go pee and drinking bottles and bottles of water. And the thing that tipped my mom off was I had a slumber party. And I was like, we need to get water bottles for everybody. And then we went to go to sleep, and I grabbed an armful of water bottles and I carried them all to my bedroom. And my friends were like, oh, thank you. And I was like, no, you have to go get your own. These are for me. I'm going to need all of these by the end of the night. And then, I ended up being diagnosed and my blood sugar was 565. So yeah, pretty close. And then it all happened very quickly. I immediately assumed that, okay, that's the end of acting. Got to find something else to do. And that was a big panic for me. And within, a few months, I had gotten my blood sugar into a really good place, better, I think, than even I was anticipating, which was really lucky. And then, we got to start talking about insulin pumps, and as soon as I learned about Tandem, jumped onto the Tandem pump, and I've been a user of Tandem ever since because I like fancy technology and it has cool little touch buttons. And that was exciting to me as a teenager. But it was a little bit of a scary start. And I remember that like one of my very favorite food is cake. And I just also immediately wrote that off and was like, we'll never have that again. Obviously, that's not true. I've found a really cool community in type 1 diabetes that I don't know that I was understanding how big of a world it was. I felt very alone at the beginning and kind of assumed, oh no, now I'm going to get emotional. Kind of assumed it was my story and my burden to bear. And then I realized that there was a whole group of people that were out there who were willing to not only share it, but give me all kinds of tips and tricks and teach me all sorts of tips of the trade that have been vitally helpful. So here I am now.
And Ryan, your diagnosis was a bit later. You're on the cusp of adult onset.
Yeah, exactly. Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you guys so much for having me. It's a privilege to be able to come up here, share my story and share the stage with these two, and these three actually. And these are amazing stories, and I'm sure you guys all have an amazing story. And so it's so cool to be here. And like she just mentioned, you know, when I was first diagnosed, my whole world was about just going fast in race cars. And I thought about growing up. My dad was a race car driver, and I thought it was the coolest thing in the world. And I didn't want to be just like my dad, which so many of us do. And when I was climbing the ranks of racing, and I grew up in California, and Charlotte, North Carolina is like that's the place to be if you want to be a NASCAR driver. I was halfway through my senior year. I had an opportunity to go drive for a NASCAR driver in his like development program. And so I was like, this is it, you know, like it was like getting my shot to go play college ball kind of is the equivalent. And I remember such a similar story, you know, I mean, I was going back and forth from California to North Carolina, and I was so thirsty all the time. I remember I was driving back from California to North Carolina, moving a bunch of my stuff, and we had to stop like every hour and a half. I mean, even at that, it was like all I could do to wait. And we'd stop, and I would get 2 like 1 liter bottles of water, and within 45 minutes they were gone. And I was, you know, the guy that I was riding with, he was like, dude, you have to pee every hour and you're chugging water like this. You got to stop. And I'm like, you don't understand. Like, I feel like I'm in a desert and I haven't drank water in days. And so that was when I really, really knew there was a problem. So I go to North Carolina for a couple of days, and I remember calling my parents, and I'm like, hey, I need to like see a doctor when I get back. Something's not right. So I flew back, and I had lost like 15 pounds in a matter of weeks. And I went and saw the doctor the next day, and very similar. I think my blood sugar was in the high 400s, and they were like, you have diabetes. And, you know, they're kind of talking to me about what that means and what it looks like as far as day to day. And my first question, my mom's in the room, and she's crying, and she's so emotional. And, you know, I'm trying to console her, but I don't even know what it means. And my first question, I mean, you'd think it'd be like, how do you eat a meal with diabetes? And I was like, okay, well, how do you drive race cars with type 1 diabetes? And they were like, what? No, you don't get to drive race cars anymore. You have to focus, and I'll never forget this. You have to focus on living a normal life. And that doctor, I just was so mad at them. I remember being so mad at them. I'm like, that is my normal. Like, driving race cars is my normal. That's my entire world, and there's no normal without race cars. So that's where I left the office, and they were like, that was it. I wasn't going to drive race cars anymore, and my world was shattered. And so very similar story. I go and I just Google NASCAR driver or race car drivers with diabetes, and I saw a couple of very, very cool stories, and it gave me hope. And so I, in reading about one of these race car drivers that has type 1, mentioned his doctor, Ann Peters, who had worked with Olympians and race car drivers and all these amazing individuals that are living amazing lives with diabetes. And it gave me so much hope. I remember thinking, like, if I can ever get back to driving a race car, I want to use that platform to tell a story. And I want to share with everybody, you know, that when you hear from a doctor say you can't do something, that is not true. You can have an amazing life with this disease. I actually reached out to the doctor that I read about in that article, and she had like a 6-month waiting list. I was like, well, that's not an option. And so my dad, he's a very persistent individual. He called like 5 times. Finally, the doctor answers. The receptionist goes and gets a doctor and was like, hey, this gentleman wants to talk to you. My dad tells the doctor the story, and she was like, can you be here tomorrow? Which was so cool. And her name's Ann Peters. She's an amazing, amazing woman. Go down to see her, and 5 minutes into we're going through the pleasantries, and 5 minutes in, she's like, okay, so you want to drive race cars? And I was like, it's all I want to do. And she was like, okay, well, are you want to listen to me? I'm like, I will do whatever you say. And 2 seconds later, she's like, all right, we're going to get you back in a race car. And it was like my whole, the weight of the world was just lifted off my shoulders. And I was willing to do whatever it took, whatever device, whatever delivery method, anything. And I didn't know what any of that meant at the time, but whatever she said I was going to do was what I was going to do. And about 3 months later, I was back in a race car and I had a CGM on the dash and I was trying to figure out how to manage diabetes while driving a race car. But it was life-changing. But I mean, it also taught me a huge lesson on what challenges really are and that not to give up when they come, but face them head on and be able to, when you do that, you're able to continue doing what you love to do.
It may also be the first time in recorded human history a teenager has said, I'll do exactly what you tell me to do.
It was the first time my parents heard it for sure.
And the last time?
Yeah, it might have been the last time, yeah.
Chad, you're up first on this next one. At the time, what was the biggest unknown to you? And what would you tell your younger self now? This is for all three of you, so we're going down the road here.
No, yeah, I think the biggest unknown, I kind of, showcased it in the film was I just wasn't sure if I was going to be able to play sports. And, it was always a goal of mine, not necessarily the NFL, but to go play college football. And so having the opportunity to, look up professional athletes with type 1 diabetes, look up NFL players with type 1 diabetes. And it was Jay Cutler, and he was, I grew up in Denver, Colorado, and he was diagnosed when he was in Denver. And so that really sparked my hope because when I was first diagnosed, I didn't really have that much knowledge other than, my cousin has type 1 diabetes, and that's all the knowledge I had. But I definitely learned pretty quickly that living this life with type 1 diabetes and still being active and still playing sports and, running around as a little kid when you're 13 years old and just being active, that it's very possible. And so I would say that was probably my biggest unknown thing that I didn't really know, and learned quickly that that wasn't the case.
What would you tell your younger self?
I would just tell my younger self to hold on to those dreams and those aspirations that I kind of had growing up, because it was always a dream of mine to play in the NFL. And, you're going to get to some point where someone tells you that it's not possible. Then you'll have type 1 diabetes on top of it. And they're just going to say, now it's really not possible. But I would just tell them, stay true to your dreams and stay true to your goals and go achieve, and don't let the doubters keep you from doing that.
Ryan, you're up.
I think that I would tell my younger self that if it's scary, it's probably going to make you stronger. And, when I think we all have, embodied this, but, the diagnosis part of it is so scary. And there's going to be so many things that you have to deal with that, quite frankly, you shouldn't have to, and you don't deserve it. But there is a lot of strength that'll come from it. And every single one of us that, lives with this disease or is affected by this disease, you've gained strength from it. And I think that while none of us got to choose it or had any say in it, I think we've all been able to take lessons and things that we've gone through because of it and been better from it. I know after my diagnosis, I was a better athlete. I was a better race car driver. I was a better son. I was a better friend. It taught me a lot of life lessons. And so I just think I would tell myself to face those head on and not, kind of get away from the fear, but just embrace it and let it take you where it's going to take you. Cause you can't choose it. Right.
Mary?
Yeah, I think my biggest unknown, honestly, was I was 13. So it was like right at that time when everything is unknown. I didn't know who I wanted to be as a grown up. I didn't know, even though I thought at 13 I was grown up, I didn't know much of I didn't know what middle school was going to be like, what high school was going to be like. And I knew that, for me, all those things would be a little bit different anyway, being that I had started acting at age 5 and was kind of used to navigating a path that didn't look like my peers' paths. But this was the big curveball where I said, okay, now I don't know who to look to. And I think I did the same thing. I turned to, okay, who can I look to? And at the time, for me, it was Nick Jonas and, a few other names on that list that I turned to and just immediately was like, okay, I can do it. And there's something to having that sense of community. But the unknown truly was it was all of it. I didn't, like you're saying, I didn't even know what any of these words meant that now are part of my everyday vocabulary. In and out, it's every thought in my brain. So those were the things that I had no idea what to do. And if I could go back and say something, I think the piece that was really tough for me early on in my journey with diabetes and with being a young actress with type 1 diabetes, I was kind of told to be hush hush about it. And, it's absolutely, it's incredible. It's awesome what you're doing. Just other people might not see it that way, or it might seem like a hindrance, or, it might deter people in certain decision-making processes. And so I felt like it was this shameful thing I had to keep. And then the thing that truly changed it for me, that I think changed my approach to diabetes, changed my approach to acting, and overall my approach to life was really changing that over to the idea of like, instead of it being this thing I needed to hide, like having it be the thing I was most excited to be loud about. And I'm very loud. I'm very proud about being type 1 diabetic because I constantly, my mom had this little, like, she would, the little, like, anything you can do, I can do better. And that was our little thing was like, I can do it with type 1 diabetes. And so everything that I accomplished, it was this little extra pat on the back that I got to give myself and say, I did that thing. I did it to my best, my best extent. And I did it conquering my type 1 diabetes at the same time. So I've become very loud and proud and excited to tell my friends and tell people about diabetes and about the disease itself, but then also all these other amazing people that I've met through type 1 diabetes that have accomplished amazing things. And it's like, and on top of that, they're type 1 diabetic. And how cool is that we all get to share this community? So would go back and say, just like shout it from the rooftops because you have nothing to be ashamed about and you have everything to be excited about what's ahead.
I'll ask a question largely on behalf of the first-timers here, and you both kind of touched on this. All three of you kind of touched on this. The fear that I think we all remember feeling, how long did that last for yourselves, and how long did it last for your family or the people who become your support systems? Was it much longer than your own? In my experience, it was way longer. Mary, you're up first. You kind of touched on this.
I was really shaken. I was very scared. I have nobody in my whole family that I know who's type 1 diabetic. I literally don't know if I had ever, I'm sure I had, obviously, we're all out there, but nobody that I knew who was out and talking about their type 1 diabetes in my whole life. So it was very earth-shattering to me at that first moment. Took a hot second. I would say for me, maybe about, I'm a very, how do I put this? Type A kind of person. So when I have a challenge put in front of me, I want to do it to my utmost. And I want the A+++ grade on it. So I saw diabetes as one of those challenges and I was like, I'm going to conquer it. So I would say once that mission wore off and the gravity of it sat in again, I think it probably took me, 6 months to a year to really settle in. And then another few years before I was like, yeah, I've got this thing under control. And then another few years before, as you do coming out of your teenagerhood, go, what was I talking about? I knew nothing. And I have to completely relearn everything. And I would say I'm still learning, I'm still growing, but that fear went away when I realized I had a community. I think all of you guys here are, that step ahead already of knowing that you have this group to lean on, I think is really important and exciting. I did actually just have a conversation. I'm over 14 years type 1 diabetic and since my diagnosis. And I just had a conversation 2 months ago with my manager, who's been my manager since I was 5 years old. And he revealed to me, he'd always made these comments about like, and how are you doing? How are you feeling? And I was like, always felt like, oh, that's really sweet that he like is so kind about how I'm feeling. And then I realized what he was asking, the question behind the question. He's like, but how are you feeling? And I was like, I'm great. What are you talking about? And he's like, but your diabetes. And we finally had this like sit down conversation where he was like, I don't know if you know what it was like for me to see you go through that. And I was like, no, I know I was living my experience. And obviously everybody in your life is doing their best to accommodate for your experience and not add any extra burdens, but it's nice to turn around and think about the people that were there for you because I didn't have time at the time to give any extra energy toward thinking about how to help the people around me help me. But it's nice, to, at this point in my life to turn back and say, okay, I know they might still be a little bit nervous for me. And that's okay. Like, I kind of like your perspective of like, rather than waiting for the fear to go away, learning to embrace it. And rather than running from this idea that the fear is ever going to go away, I think you change it from fear into a challenge, into something to learn from and to conquer. And though the thought is always in the back of my mind of what if, then I have a list of information of different things that I can say, okay, what if? Well, I have an answer for that, and we have resources for that. So I think it constantly changes, it constantly grows, but realistically, I'd say it took me, a couple years to fully settle in and feel like I had my hands on the reins.
Yeah, very similar to what she said. When I was first diagnosed and, I just talked about it, being told to never race again. And so you're just wrestling with all those things and trying to understand where do I go from here. So there was about a 3-month gap between when I was diagnosed and when I got to see my endo that I've now been with for 12 years. And in that 3 months, it was a lot of highs and lows, literally and metaphorically, a lot of highs and lows. And the thing that I learned in that 3 months that a 17-year-old teenager does, as you alluded to, I took my parents for granted pretty much every day, right? And everything they did for me without even knowing it. And when I was diagnosed, to your point, you're just trying to get through the day and you're thinking about how hard this is on you. And it really took me back when I was able to reflect on and see my parents, how much they rallied around me and how much they were there for me and were willing to do whatever it took to help me chase my dreams. Or if my dreams were going to have to pivot, they were willing to help me find a new dream. And I think that in that moment, I was like, wow, like having supportive parents is, and a support system in general, wherever it comes from, I mean, it's everything. And it's what's going to help me not just pursue racing or, figure out how to manage my diabetes, whatever I want to do in life. So, from that perspective, there was, in those 3 months, I found a much deeper connection with my parents and a deeper appreciation. But yeah, there was a lot of fear in there for me and my family. And that fear lasted until I went in, sat down, and I briefly mentioned that story. But when I sat down with my endo, which wasn't my endo at the time, it made a lot of sense to me as I reflect on it, why so quickly into the appointment before she got into any of the methods that we were going to use to manage my diabetes and how we were going to approach racing in NASCAR with and managing diabetes. Before any of that happened, she said, we are going to get you back in a race car. And I think because she understood the mentality side of it. And yeah, I mean, we talk about how amazing the technology has been. And I've been a tandem pump user for many years now, and it's been unbelievable to train with and go through life with and made life so much easier. But truly what Ann taught me was it starts with your mentality and how you view your diabetes. And when I was first diagnosed, it was like, hey, approach this with fear and approach this with you're kind of made of glass. And then when I sat down with Ann, it was the complete opposite. Like, we're going to lead with what we want to do, and we're going to build your diabetes management around your life and what works for you. And I stopped being afraid of it from that point forward. And it was like, all right, we're going to attack this thing. We're going to go on offense and we're going to go figure this thing out. And it was after that, it was like all gas, no brakes. We're going to do this. And ever since then, I've never thought about diabetes any different. It was very liberating.
And Chad, you're up with the last one, the fear and how long that lasted and for you and the support system and getting through that.
Yeah, like they alluded to, there's definitely that fear when you're first diagnosed, just because it's a new world that you have to live every single day with for the rest of your life. And, one thing that kind of happened to me was my cousin that I talked about before, he actually passed away from type 1 diabetes because the control that he had with it kind of faltered and he ended up passing away from it. And so when I was diagnosed, I always had that fear and that in the back of my mind that, I really got to take control of this disease because it can go wrong like that. And so that was just always something that was always in the back of my head. And kind of like we talked about, that mindset that you have to have, you have it, there's nothing you can do about it. So let's change our perspective and let's go attack it. And so kind of when I was going through all of my college recruiting and going to the NFL, I kind of used that perspective when coaches would ask me like, hey, you have type 1 diabetes. Are you going to be able to do this? And I kind of changed the perspective and was like, I'm able to do all these things because of my type 1 diabetes. I'm so well managed because of my diabetes. I can, I'll show up on time. I'll have all the notes taken. And I kind of use that perspective just, my diabetes benefits me. And I think that's one thing that really helped conquer that fear that I had with this disease. And, that support system is so huge. When I was first diagnosed, my mom and dad, they were very, sad for me, but they were also, there to support me in anything I need, and they still support me. But my mom, she's always a go-getter, and so I think that's kind of where I got my perspective from. And, I think one thing that also helped me is they kind of, let me do it on my own. Now, they would always be there for me, but they always, let me take care of my diabetes. And nowadays, I have my fiance who's always around. She has the app, and she's making sure I have everything I need before I go to a game, go to a practice, or at the house and everything. And, I'm just so thankful for that support system. And it's something that you really do need to have. And, having events like this where you're able to talk with others and really build your support system, it's great. And when I was first diagnosed in middle school, I would try and tell all my friends about my diabetes and try really educate them on the disease. And there'd be times at lunch where I'm asking them, hey, you want to get, it was before I had the tandem pump, and I was asking them if they wanted to give me my injection at the lunch table. And one time I was getting an injection, and our vice principal walks over and thought we were doing something else. And he's like, hey, what are you doing? But no, I just always wanted to include everyone, educate them of diabetes, just to have that bigger support system.
I think you trust your friends more than I trust my friends. I asked that question specifically to drive home the point that nobody has to figure this out in a day or a week or a month or even a year, and the help is always there. So thank you all for driving that point home. Chad, you're still up. Don't put down the mic. You have an upcoming NFL season. What's it like on game day preps? And is there a difference between prep for practice and prep for a game?
No, there's definitely couple things that I do that are a little bit different. And so typically heading into practice or a game, I like to keep my blood sugar around 200 to 220. I just found that kind of works best with the longevity of the game or practice. It will keep my blood sugar up. Heading into practice, I'll make sure my sugar's I have a Dexcom, so I'm checking my Dexcom leading up into practice. I'll disconnect for practice. I'll go out there. Usually about halfway through practice is when I'll test my blood sugar again, make sure it's in the right range that I want it. If I need some insulin, that's when I can reconnect or give myself an injection. And then if I need some sugar, I love honey stinger chews. I'm not sure if anyone's had those, but those work great for me when I'm out at practice. Those and some Gatorade. So that's kind of what I do for practice. So then game day is a little bit different just because you're out there for so much longer, and it's about 4 hours that you're out there, and the whole time I'm disconnected from my insulin pump. And so what I'll do is I'll give myself a little bit of insulin that I'm going to miss for that hour bolus. So it's about my hour bolus is 1.4. So since I'm disconnected for a couple hours until halftime, I'll give myself about 3 units and do that and test it each quarter to make sure that my sugars are good. So we have athletic trainers that have my whole kit. And so they'll grab me on the sideline and say, all right, it's time to test your sugar. So I'll do that. And then if it's in a good place, I'll go back on the field and keep running around. If I need something, that's when I'll adjust. And then just throughout the game, keep testing, test at halftime, test third quarter. Then after the game, reconnect with my insulin pump.
Is it thrown off if there's overtime or the game just lasts longer because of TV timeouts or anything, or is it just more of the same?
It's more of the same. The game typically is not too many overtimes. We had one overtime last year. And, with that, my blood sugar didn't seem to go super crazy. There's one thing with game days, my adrenaline is through the roof. And with that, my blood sugar just likes to keep going with it. And so that was something that I'm still learning today, is really how to manage that adrenaline boost on game days with my blood sugar. And talking with other players in the NFL that have type 1 diabetes, it's been a great resource just to understand, all right, this is what they do. This is what works for them. I think practice is a great opportunity to, it's practice for your diabetes for that game day, to really know, all right, this is what I'm going to do in practice. This is where my blood sugar's at. All right, now let's apply it to game day.
Mary, the audience doesn't need me to tell them this. You are in pretty awesome karate scenes in Cobra Kai. Does the cast know about diabetes? To what extent? How involved are they? And can we spot your devices at any point in the show?
That's actually funny. I haven't gone back and searched as to whether or not you can spot anything, but I'm sure if you know, Like, I'll have to actually do that at some point. I hate watching myself on television, so I have a really bad issue with that. But for this purpose, I would go back and critique because I think it's fun. But karate gis are actually the easiest for me to hide the insulin pump in. Because I can just kind of put it basically on my back, which is, that's the big, factor for me with Tandem, is the flexibility of where to put it is very helpful in that I have to be a little creative sometimes. But yes, I actually love my karate pajama days because that means I get to hide my insulin pump very easily. Yeah, I have had a blast with getting to figure out, I didn't know any martial arts coming into the show. In fact, I hated exercise with a burning passion. And so I would avoid it at all costs. I'm pretty sure I flunked PE for that reason specifically in middle school, but finding, martial arts was kind of the thing where I was like, I saw it the first day on set. I wasn't scripted to have any martial arts, initially in the show. And I saw the guys training and I was like, I want to do that. That looks super fun and cool. So I keep hearing people's devices going off, and this is the most surreal experience because I'm so used to it being me and only me that I'm I keep panicking and I'm like, oh boy, is it okay? Great. Anyway, I asked to get to do diabetes. Good Lord, I asked to get to do karate, early on, and they were like, just hold off, we'll get there. And, coming into season 2, I got to do a whole lot more action. And so it was a big learning curve of learning karate. And then, of course, I had the secondary of learning how my body reacted to karate, how my diabetes reacted to karate was a whole nother aspect for me. And in all of that, I did end up telling a lot of everybody on my casting crew. Like I said, I'm loud and proud about it now. I am excited to inform people. I get so nerdy about it. My favorite is when somebody asks me a question, what's that? I'm like, oh, I have the speech. And I'm like, I hope you're ready to sit down. So I like to share, about it. But yeah, I have little shorthands with all of my, cast and crew at this point. I have some of my cast members that know a whole lot about it, who have just really dove in and want to be part of my support system. My wonderful makeup artist, Jamie, on the show, actually in my makeup kit keeps fruit snacks for me. So if I'm ever like running low, she has the little like Welch's fruit snacks, and I'll be like, hey, hi, I need those. But actually, we had one of our PAs a couple seasons ago wore cargo pants every day. And so she just would load the cargo pants down with snacks for me. And so I just like, it was specifically during season 4 where we had a, I guess, spoiler alert if nobody's watched the show and you plan to, but we had a tournament in that season, and I did compete in the tournament. And those were very, very, very long, very physically exhaustive days. In between shooting the fights that we were shooting, we would also have to go learn our other fights. So like while I'm shooting this fight with Peyton, I'm learning, the fight that I needed to do with, this other Cobra Kai ND. And like while I was doing this one, I needed to be practicing that one. So there wasn't any time I was basically sitting down. And that's not, like I said, something that I was super used to prior to this show. So you guys would have had a lot to teach me there, I'm sure. I had to learn a little bit on the fly. So yeah, my casting crew members got, the whole spiel of like, okay, like, if I'm getting stressed, when I get anxious, my blood sugar's going up. So like adrenaline, like when I'm getting hyped, my blood sugar's going up. But then the hot lights on set bring my blood sugar down. So I'm like battling this thing back and forth. If I have a crying scene that like exhausts me, I end up my blood sugar dips. And then if I have, a big lunch that day, because you don't get to pick what you get for lunch, it's just what's there in catering. And so like, I don't know what's coming. I got to figure that out. So it's just a lot of this. And so yes, they all have learned quite a lot about my type 1 diabetes. And luckily I have, like I said, some who are extra supportive. And maybe that's what you could probably catch more than you could catch my devices even on camera, is if you go back and look for who of my castmates or myself has fruit snacks stuck in their pockets.
And Ryan, on race day, you're in a fire suit. It's hot. You're in a car. It's hot. You're on a track. It's hot. How do you prepare for dealing with that? And is there any correlation between how fast you're going and your blood sugar?
Yeah, that's probably the thing about driving race cars. It's the most, I don't know about overlooked, but just people don't know that much about it. So especially during the summer, and we race a lot in the South where it's super hot and humid, and on a hot day, it'll be 140 to 150 degrees inside the car, and you're 2 to 3 hour races. So, you'll lose 5 to 10 pounds just from how much you sweat and how much water loss you go through. So obviously hydrating super important, but between adrenaline, like these two both talked about, and that bit of dehydration, that no matter how hydrated you are, how much water you drink during the event, you're going to experience some dehydration. And so blood sugar typically trends up. So I usually start my races around 120, anticipating that little bit of a spike. But like he talked about, the training piece, which it's very hard to simulate driving a race car, right? Like that's just not something that you can practice very efficiently, and NASCAR doesn't allow a whole lot of testing outside of like simulators. Well, a simulator, yeah, you can, try a lot of things, but when you wreck a simulator, you just hit a reset button. When you wreck in a real race car, there's no reset. So there's a lot more stress, anxiety, and pressure and adrenaline, all the things that go into it. But I think the thing that has helped me the most is, training outside, whether it's cycling or running, kind of the endurance training side of things. And that's where, the exercise feature on my pump has been unbelievable. Just to be able to, I feel like I have like a buddy helping me manage it almost, like another set of eyes. It's helping me. So that's been something that's been really, really helpful the last couple of years as I've been training. But yeah, I mean, nothing prepares you to basically cook yourself in a race car for 2 or 3 hours every weekend. It's extreme, and I think the adrenaline and the heat are the two biggest variables there that are hard to account for, hard to anticipate.
Ryan, you touched on this. I'm gonna ask this question and go a bit out of order here. What on the devices, features, options, sort of systems? How do you use that to make life easier for all three of you? And Ryan, just kind of pick up where you left off there.
Yeah, exactly. So I kind of touched on that. The exercise feature, the Control IQ and the exercise feature are massive. I've been on a Dexcom since 2011. So I mean, that's been, basically, like 3 months after I was diagnosed, I was on a Dexcom. So I've been through many iterations of it and seen that technology develop. And I've been on the Tandem pump for about 4 years now. And being able to integrate those two has been, literally life-changing. I can't overstate that. The exercise feature has been something where I feel like adaptation and if my workouts are progressive where, I start, maybe a little more mild and then it increases into, very high intensity training. Obviously that plays a huge role in what my blood sugar does throughout training. It's massive. And then, I think the thing is that where I don't experience it so much inside the car, but certainly training is lows. And I don't see it in the car because of that adrenaline dehydration. But while I'm training, I mean, it's just like, and typically if I have a low, I can feel it if I'm at home, if I'm cooking dinner, or if I'm, hanging out, watch TV. But when you're training, I mean, you're already, going through it. And so the exhaustion. And so that's where I feel like the Tandem pump has been unbelievable for me, and taken just a lot of stress away, where obviously, you've always got to manage this. And it's never not in the back of your mind, but you feel like you got some help is the best way I can describe it.
Chad, do you have any favorite features that you always rely upon?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I use, every little feature that's on there, whether it's the exercise for a workout that I'm going to, I usually turn that on. I mean, ever since, I always use Control IQ, obviously, because that's been life-changing, like you were saying. And also even just the sleep schedule, that I'm able to put the sleep schedule in and to wake up in the morning. It's nice to see that straight line as I'm sleeping throughout the night. And then also being a professional athlete, there's a lot of high carb meals that I have to eat. And so with the option to give a bolus now, then give 50% of the bolus later, that's another feature that I use all the time, just because I have so many high carb meals in training and whatnot.
Mary, any favorite features?
Yeah, I think the thing that I'm realizing for myself as I'm sitting here and listening to you guys is that you guys have these wonderfully understandable schedules that you know about yourselves very well. And my job is like the polar opposite, where I have no idea what my day is going to look like. I have no idea what my week's going to look like. I have no idea what my year's going to look like. Every job brings about completely new and different situations that I have no way of foreseeing or practicing. Like I never would have believed that I would have done a karate show 5 years before I did it. So I had no ability to learn those things before I got there. So the features that have been super helpful. I mean, I also use probably every little feature that's on this insulin pump to the best of its ability that I can, because I never know what to expect. So it's nice to have, like you said, a buddy, an extra pair of eyes on my device, just knowing that it's kind of supporting me. The sleep feature is super helpful for me, although I can never stick to the schedule because I never know what hours I'm going to be sleeping. There's nights where we start filming at 11 p.m., and we wrap at 6 a.m. And those are the days that, like, I've got to be able to flip it over, which is, it's so handy to know that even though I'm going to be sleeping at the hours of the day today that I should have been awake yesterday, my insulin pump's going to help me kind of even out those curves. And then, like I said, the flexibility of where to put my insulin pump is another huge factor for me that's been super great with Tandem.
I want to get to audience cues in just a few moments here, but I do have a few more questions I want to ask. Chad, you have a pretty neat story about in the draft, another NFL player with T1D reached out and kind of offered that olive branch to help you out. Tell us that story.
Yeah. So when I was going through the draft process, there was a player down in Miami, Ferguson. He reached out to me through Instagram and just kind of was giving me that extra hand, that extra support, saying, if there's anything that you ever need, you can always reach out to me. He plays for Miami Dolphins as a long snapper there. And there's been a few other conversations with other guys in the NFL, such as like Noah Gray or Mark Andrews, where, they're available to me. If I need anything, I'm available to them if they need anything, because, everyone's diabetes is a little bit different. Not everyone reacts to insulin the same, or, everyone's day is a little bit different, but we all understand each other. And so, having those guys that have been in the NFL a little bit longer than I have, and kind of understand what I'm going through, they've always been there and available to me to help me out. And so that's just been great to, hear what they do for game days or hear what they do for practice. And I love hearing people's, what's their favorite low snack when they're out there on the field. And so just having, like we talked about earlier, just having that community where having someone that understands it and gets it and is in the same spot as you is extremely helpful.
I'm going to go out of order here to Mary. Is there a T1D community in the industry, or are you creating one?
I think the interesting thing about the film industry is that it's a small world. Everybody says that, it's a big world, but it's a really small world, and you'll work with people and then work with them again 10 years later, and you get to remember each other. The fun aspect of that for me has been the people that I worked with as a little kid who get to know me now as an adult and kind of learn this new fact about me. And I get to kind of have this bond of like, oh yeah, I remember I knew you right before. I was there on the first job you did after you were diagnosed, and kind of those journeys. I know there are other type 1 diabetics that are actors out there. I think we're all kind of spread out. I know some of them, and when we do run into each other, it's like this like automatic friendship where, like, even if you've never met somebody before, you see the little, see a little machine, or you hear that little beep go off and you're like, hello. So I've made lots of new friends that way, but I would like to say that, hopefully, I think the more that I'm excited to talk about it. And I think the more people that I get to know that, in this kind of turning of tides where we get to just be really talkative about it and really connect over things like social media. I think it gives really like new opportunities to have that kind of community.
And Ryan, you mentioned earlier there is or are at least some T1Ds in the racing community, which I wasn't aware of, but I think you're a bit more of a trailblazer in this. But I'm also going to ask you a different question and a separate question. You'll be back in a car soon, so if I can borrow a term from my industry, break some news for us here.
Yeah. First of all, I have a really good friend, and when they were telling their stories, that's probably, if there's one cool thing about diabetes, it's the community, right? And that instant connection you feel when you meet someone, especially if they're in your industry, where you guys share that and you know everything that goes into it because it's just so consuming. But one of my dear friends, he's an IndyCar driver, so different discipline of racing. But him and I would have never connected in a million years, just because we're kind of two different worlds in motorsports. But his name's Connor Daly, and he's a great friend of mine, and we connected through diabetes. And I mean, we're really good friends now. When they were telling their stories, I thought about that. The breaking news. So I don't. You kind of put me on the spot here. So I don't know how much I can say. I don't know how much I can say or can't say. But yeah, so I have a very exciting race coming up. I haven't raced in about a year, a little over a year. So I haven't been back in a car in a while. I've still been keeping in shape, so that's good. But yeah, so in October I'll be competing in a NASCAR event. I think that's all I can say actually. But yeah, but I'm super excited. Yeah, so it's a good thing I've still been in the gym because that's the kind of thing with NASCAR is opportunities come and go, but when you get them, you got to be ready. So I'm super pumped, and so we will definitely, as I can share more details and as everything gets ironed out, I will definitely be posting on Twitter, Instagram, Threads, whatever platform there is out there. So to keep everyone updated.
Nice Threads shout out there.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask one more very quick question. And as I do that, we can line up to ask audience questions, except I don't see over there. There's the mic, and Blair will kind of lead that charge as I fire off this last question. And I'll start it by saying, the question is, what is the one piece of advice you would give to the audience here? And the advice I always give is diabetes does not require perfection. You can make mistakes. Heck, you can even make a lot of mistakes, though try not to. But it does require you to keep trying. Know what the blood sugar is and make the correction. That's the one piece of advice I always found helpful. The idea that it doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be, and you need to keep working at it. So whoever wants to fire off first, the one word of advice here you'd give to the crowd.
Yeah, I mean, kind of touch base on it, but just always hold to your goals and your aspirations that you have, and don't let diabetes kind of get in the way. And I think one other piece of advice, I'm not sure if you're newly diagnosed or you've been in it for 10 years, but lean on your community, lean on the people that support you. I think that's been a huge help for me. And I think that's just one little advice I'd give you guys.
Yeah, I think for me, I mean, that embodies so much of it. Obviously it is find that thing that you want in life, and strive for it, because that can keep you, that can weather the tough times. Like, why am I doing this? And having that purpose is so important. So find that and hold on to it, because it'll get you through a lot. And then also for me, it's really develop and cultivate that relationship with your support system, but also your doctor. I mean, that communication can go so far. And I know at times, I can go a while without talking to my endo. And when we reconnect and, when we have that appointment, it's like, I mean, it's always like a breath of fresh air, and there's always something new and always a small change that I didn't know about. So I think just working with your doctor, stay in communication, and ask questions. Like, if something's not working and you want, something feels like it's more difficult than it should be, talk about it, because chances are there's a solution. And there's a tweak you can make on your pump, or there's an adjustment you can make, or there's a setting. Like, it's always evolving. You did talk about what is your favorite feature, and I forgot to mention Mobile Bolus, which if no one's checked that out, it is so. Like, I didn't think it'd be that life-changing, but like when I'm on an airplane or something and I don't have to pull my pump out and I'm already have my phone in my hand, the Mobile Bolus is so sweet.
And Mary, the advice.
I think, okay, all right. There's so much. To boil it down to something, or maybe it's going to end up being a couple of things. I know for one thing, for me, a big aspect early on, and then I have to remind myself all of the time, is that there's no such thing as a perfect diabetic. Everybody has this idea that everybody that I come in contact with, I guess I won't speak for an entire community because I haven't gotten to meet you all yet, but the people that I speak to have this inherent sense of anxiety about it and like shame about it, that like you think you're doing something wrong. And it's hard to get to sometimes to admit, even like, I've been running high like this whole week and I've been trying everything, but I can't get it. But there's no shame to it. It's a thing. That's what it is. That's how it goes. Our bodies change, our lives change. And making those adjustments, like you said, leaning on your community, being able to say like, oh, I'm running high all the time, and telling your endo that is awesome, because then you get to have that conversation of, oh, like, yeah, there's this quick little thing we can do. So I think getting the idea out of my head that there's something I needed to be living up to, rather than that I myself am the example of diabetes, and that doing it to the best of my ability is all I can ask of myself. And I think that's true for all of us in life, but specifically with diabetes, it was a learning curve for me. And then I think the other aspect, I guess, is just diabetes is a part of me. It's not the only part of me. It's a wonderful part of me. It's a pillar of who I am, because I've used it as a tool to make connections and to learn things about myself, my body, the world, medicine, all these things that I might not have learned about or had interest in. So I absolutely am so appreciative of the experiences that I've had, but it's just one aspect of me, and it doesn't have to be all of me. It can be a little piece of everything that I do, but it doesn't have to be the whole pie. And I think that's been a wonderful journey for me too, is that I am Mary. One of the things about me is I'm type 1 diabetic, and I'm proud of that.
You're listening to Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
You can see photos of the panel and that Chad Muma film that I mentioned. I will link all of that up at diabetes-connections.com. Just look for this episode's homepage. As I said in the beginning, I've got a back-to-school webinar coming up this Thursday. I will put that link in the show notes as well. That's back to school for elementary and middle school and high school age, not for college. I don't know enough yet to be an expert. Hardly. We just started. But I am going to be speaking about college, kind of just our prep and our experiences so far. So watch for that on social media. I'm partnering with the Diabetes Link, which used to be called the College Diabetes Network. So more on that to come. Thank you, as always, to my editor, John Buchanan from Audio Editing Solutions. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Stacey Sims. I'll see you back here soon. Until then, be kind to yourself.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Sims Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.